So good morning and welcome to this month's On the Mic. My name is Kellie Hogan and I'm a judge in Wichita, Kansas. Uh, my brief background is I've been on the bench now for a little over 5 years. Before that, I worked for Kansas Legal Services, our Kansas State legal aid organization, where I worked on cases involving children whose parents weren't taking care of them. I'm currently on the board with the NCWBA, and I've been president of the Kansas Women Attorneys as well as the Wichita Attorneys, and I'm here today as your moderator. And so our speaker today, I'm happy that Laura Ice agreed to join us. And Laura is holding that title that we probably all hope to reach someday, and that is of a retired person. Laura is a proud Washburn Law graduate, and she's fairly recently retired from Textron Financial, where she retired as the legal counsel. A very interesting job that took her around the world as people wanted to buy airplanes and working with lawyers all over the globe. So, Laura, my unending appreciation for your agreement to be a panelist this morning to talk to us about bylaws. So we'll just jump right into it. Why do you think organizations should review their bylaws regularly, Laura?
Well, Kellie, because things change and your organization may be not following your bylaws, and you may want to have a simpler way of getting something done. Um, so the funny thing is that when I served as president of the Wichita Bar Association and also the Kansas Bar Association, and in both those organizations, we updated our bylaws while I was president, which is something transactional lawyers just love, not so much the litigation lawyers. And also, while I was at Textron Financial, we amended and updated our bylaws there. So,
And that is
um,
what brings you here today.
so you have to look at what well, first of all, the bylaws are like the statutes. Our The dean of our law school used to always say, "Don't think great thoughts, read the statute." And it's really the same thing. Whenever you join an organization, the first thing you should be given is a set of that organization bylaws, and you should read them so that you know how that organization is supposed to function.
Do you think that's a standard practice in the organizations that you've been a member of or led?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, it's haphazard, I would say. Um, Sometimes you'll be in a meeting and someone will say, ask a question, and I'll go, what do the bylaws say? And everyone rolls their eyes.
You mean like we probably need to get some new officers for next year? How are we supposed to do that?
Right.
Right. I
So, like an example, with the Wichita Bar bylaws, this is a good example of an update we needed to do. That organization, the Wichita Bar Association, was formed in 1915. And from the time it was formed to amend the dues, change the dues structure, or to change the bylaws, you had to have a special meeting of all the members. which was all the lawyers in Wichita that were members of the Wichita Bar, and vote on it in person in a special meeting. Well, that just was not, I mean, it was just not workable. And you'd have that meeting and everyone, there'd be consternation. Well, why do we need to raise the dues? And so while I was on the WBA board, we amended that. And we went to the meeting to explain the reasons for the amendments, that the board sees the finances every month and needs to have the power without all this structure to amend the dues structure. And if we do that, then we would give plenty of notice in advance and explain the reasons. And so that's how those bylaws were amended. And then in addition to that, at the time when we elected officers, we had a special meeting and you had to show up in person to elect the officers at the monthly lunch scheduled in March. And so if you couldn't go to that lunch, you couldn't vote. So we also amended the bylaws to allow a window of time in advance for you to vote at the bar office on the officers. That was the Wichita Bar. So sometimes things are outdated. The Kansas Bar, to run for Board of Governors, you had to submit a petition with 25 signatures. And that may be okay for Wichita or Topeka or Kansas City, but if you're living in Hayes or Goodland or
some
even
town we've not heard of because it's so small.
right, it's hard to get 25 signatures. We wanted to encourage more people to be interested in running, so one of the bylaws amendments that we made was to reduce the number of signatures of members on that petition to 5, so that more people, so it would be easier to have an interest and run for the Board of Governors.
So it sounds like that you mentioned technology as a reason to revise bylaws in terms of your remote voting, the need to increase the diversity, I guess, of who could run for bar office by lowering your number of signatures. What other things have you seen triggering a need for a bylaws reduction or revision? Sorry. Or perhaps reduction.
Well, with bar membership, probably like all bars, like all national organizations, we're struggling with membership levels, and those membership levels are dropping. And so the Kansas Bar bylaws said that it separated us into 7 districts in the state. And then each district would have 1 board member, but if there was more than 400 members, for each 400 members from that district, you got another seat at the table. Well, membership had dropped such that Wichita was going to lose a seat, Topeka was going to lose a seat, and so we stepped back and looked at the percentages of membership in every district. And if we changed it to percentage instead of the 400 number, the representation would stay the same, at least for now. So we made that change.
That makes a lot of sense to look at. I mean, for people to be looking at your bylaws and deciding, does this make sense for what our current environment is, instead of continually trying to make the old rules fit. So who do you think should lead the revision process for bylaws?
It needs to be people with experience with the organization who may have seen the issues that the organization is facing. So with the KBA, we had some past presidents on the committee. that looked at the bylaws. We had the incoming president-elect was the chair of that committee, and board member volunteers who had been on the board for longer time, because the experience really matters, because it really takes a while to serve on a board before you start to spot what's working and what's not working.
What do you think you found as one of the most outdated or unclear sections of bylaws?
Sometimes, like the election processes in the KBA bylaws were a little unclear. The voting procedures, the bylaws had been written before there was Zoom. And so we wanted to, make it clear that you can vote on a Zoom meeting, not in person. Because a lot of our board meetings now are hybrid. There's in person and then people Zoom in on the side. So those are some of the things that are not clear. And it's hard to make it clear. You really have to have a good writer sit down and write out the bylaw, and then everybody look at it critically on the committee to see if you read it the same way. One time when I was a young lawyer, I went into our senior partner. I was fresh out of law school, and I asked him a question, and he said, "Well, did you read the statute?" And I said, "Well, no, I thought you might tell me off the top of your head." He said, "Why don't you go read the statute and then come back and we'll talk about it?" So I read the statute, and then I came back and I said, "It's ambiguous." And he went, "Now you're thinking like a lawyer." But the bylaws, if you're not careful, they can be ambiguous. You can put the comma in the wrong place.
Wow. Uh, those have to be some challenging meetings. So how do you navigate that or deal with resistance of members to changing things?
Well, what we did with our committee, instead of having them wade through all the red lines, we made some talking points. That's popular, talking points, where we summarized what the changes were and why they were, then accompanied with the red lines so that they could read the executive summary and see what we were changing and why. And then same thing, so present that at the board meeting, present it to the executive committee, discuss, present it at the board meeting, discuss. And really, when we presented it at the Kansas Bar board meeting in April, there wasn't much discussion. It just made it clear what we were doing and why, and nobody really fussed about it.
So it sounds like one of the strategies that you used was really providing a lot of information up front.
Right, right. Explaining why we did it, what wasn't working, what our goal was. Like I'm getting more people to run for the board and spreading it out more, and making that easier. And everybody really understood that.
So what about legal or operational risks that come from outdated bylaws? Any thoughts on that?
Well, sometimes if you take a serious action in a meeting and you haven't followed the bylaws, you're going to have to just redo that later and follow the bylaws. Um, an interesting thing is that you don't have to follow Robert's Rules of Order. And we made that clear in the KBA bylaws. that was discretionary, because really, who knows the Robert's Rules of Order back like the back of their hand? It can get complicated, and it's a lot more um, uh, how you can just really get screwed up if you're supposed to follow those rules and you don't.
So
So our
you could
bylaws said,
unintentionally violate them and then end up having to redo things.
right. So
Have you
you might have to have at the next board meeting, redo the discussion and redo the vote because you haven't followed the bylaws.
have you had any experience where boards face liability or losing their nonprofit status or their actions being challenged when they weren't following their bylaws?
Um, no, we really didn't. One organization that I was a part of had an executive director who took some funds. And
Sadly, I think
so,
many of us could say that we've been a part of such an organization.
what we did then was review the bylaws, update them, add a finance committee, add extra oversight, um, ways that wouldn't happen again. That executive director completed diversion and paid the money back, so that was good.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but how can bylaws reinforce equity and inclusion in leadership?
Probably who sits on the board and how they're elected can help that. Um, some bar organizations have like a diversity seat, so a board member to represent a diverse um, group, and also so that to open up, to not having to attend all the meetings in person, uh, to vote other than the normal way. Um, I think those are all steps to take.
So, what do you think is the right balance between having specificity and flexibility in bylaws?
Well, we talked about that a lot when we were writing this, because we wanted we didn't want the election language to be too specific, so that there could be some flexibility in who ran, and um, you have to. I don't know how to really articulate the balance, but if you make it too specific, it's too hard to do. So you want to be able to write a bylaw that you can follow um, without having too many T's to cross and I's to dot to get through to the end.
So, what are your suggestions for an organization that wants to properly adopt updated bylaws?
Well, I think you'd get together. First, you'd look and see what your goals are. What are the problems and how your organization's operating? What problems have you been seeing? What needs to be fixed? Or get together a committee of people who have experience with the organization, um, the executive director, past presidents, um, people who served on the board many years, and then probably a bright voice, somebody just coming in who might balance everything off and have a fresh idea.
Mhm.
And then you get together and you sit down and you say, all right, what's not working? what do we want to address? In the KBA committee, each of us took a section of the bylaws and worked on it. And then we came back together and met over each person's changes on their section. And of course, because you're a bunch of lawyers, there's a bunch of fixes to everybody's fixes.
And then the people who missed that meeting come to the next meeting and then you fix everything back
Right,
to how
right,
it was. I think it's a very frustrating process.
right. One of our board members made fun of me in front of everybody at a Wichita bar meeting for making them do the bylaws.
I can see why people avoid bylaws, but it does seem like they're very important for structure. And I think that I feel like I've been more in organizations where nobody has looked at the bylaws or looked at them lately. And then somebody asks a question like, well, can we do this or should we do this? Or, hey, weren't we supposed to have an election? And
Right.
then we try to find the one person who might be able to find the bylaws. So it does seem like this is the best practice to look at them ahead of time before we're in an argument about if we can spend money to do something or
Yeah, or an issue will come up at a meeting and 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 you go, you guys, it's in the bylaws. It's
and then everybody's
there.
like, bylaws? We have them?
Now on specificity, we have separate policies and procedures. So you have the bylaws that say how the organization runs, but then um, there are policies and procedures that may be easier to change, but like what your reimbursement plan is for travel, who goes to what events, and um, when does the executive director get evaluated and how, all of that. That doesn't need to be in the bylaws, that can be separate.
So what do you think are mistakes or red flags that organizations should avoid with their bylaws?
Well, um, inconsistency in what you're doing, um, ambiguity in a bylaw. If someone can read something two different ways, then you need to fix it. And an organization can't really just update the bylaws without everybody meeting on it and talking about what you're doing.
So
Uh,
it sounds like the way that you've done it is the a special committee appointed, then breaking up into subcommittees, getting your board's approval, and then going to your membership.
right.
Right,
And
with
publishing it out
notice
to the membership
and then
and explaining when you publish it out to the membership, then explaining what you've done. An executive summary and why, what you've done and why. The why is the most important part.
so do you feel like any of these updates you've been a part of have sparked any controversy?
I The only kind of controversial part of the changes are who sits on the board and how many district governors there are from each district. Um, in Kansas, it's kind of interesting because we have to watch so that we don't get unbalanced because we have a lot of members from Kansas City who are members of the Kansas bar and the Missouri bar. And if you go by the number of members, pretty soon you could be the Kansas City bar instead of the Kansas bar. So we had to be careful about that um, without alienating our good Kansas City members who add a lot to the board and are very active.
Right. When other areas are losing membership, they're keeping theirs.
Yeah, right.
So, what ways do you think bylaws help or hinder a leadership pipeline in your DEI efforts?
Oh, well, first, in the leadership pipeline, if you have bylaws that everybody knows and follows regularly, it adds stability to the organization so that there's a clear path on what needs to be done when and why and how to do it. Um, we have had turnover in various bar associations that I've been in, other organizations where an executive director leaves and then you hire someone, they're there a short time, and then you can lose some of the glue that keeps you together. But if you've got the bylaws down and everybody understands what they are and how to do it, then you can keep the gang all going forward and keep the stability while you have this time of change within leadership. And
So,
as a new president comes in, which happens each year with every organization I've been in, um, if you've got this clear rule book on how that is supposed to work, then it adds stability.
and it probably gives some confidence to the person coming in as the new president about what they should be doing and how they should be doing it and try to.
Right. The bylaws, can also, they will lay out what the offices are, what each officer is responsible for, what their role is. Before this meeting, just for fun, because I got Chat GPT and I like to see what it does. Um, for example, it's really good at writing poems for special occasions. Give it some prompts and it'll write you a great poem. My granddad used to do that for special occasions. He'd spend hours. I can do it with Chat GPT and they're cute. But anyway, I asked Chat GPT, write me a set of bylaws for a bar association, and it spit out bylaws in 5 seconds.
Wow.
So you could start that way and then you can refine it. If you're starting from scratch with any organization, you could start with artificial intelligence and then refine it to your needs.
Have you been involved in any organizations that have had any kind of bylaws related crisis or close call that made you rethink the structure?
No, I can't think of any.
I think what comes to mind in Kansas, like the rest of the country, occasionally there will be a political issue that's very divisive. And we will get people on both sides of the issue feeling very strongly about what the organization should do. And so
Yeah,
I think we've used our bylaws to kind of help navigate that.
we have put that in Kansas bar policies and procedures. We have a really we have a very robust process for following legislation and when the bar will chime in on certain issues and who has the responsibility and the spokesperson helm to do that. And there is also a complete and thorough section on responding to criticism of the judiciary and how the bar, and it's not in our bylaws, it's in the policies and procedures, how our bar will respond if there is criticism of the judiciary, which our professional rules require us to respond, I think.
I think one of the challenges is in these current events is that people want a quick response, and our bylaws have us making a thoughtful response, which can be frustrating.
Right. It can take a while. Like if the newspaper called me up right now and wanted to know, wanted me to issue a statement on the next year's constitutional amendment issue, I would say, well, I can't talk to that now, but I may be able to get you a comment in a week or so.
So for those non-Kansans who may be on the line or view this in the future, we have next August, we'll be deciding whether or not we will start directly electing our Supreme Court. Right now, we have a nomination process. So Laura, let's final question here. So if there were no barriers, what section of your bylaws would you revise today?
Well, we just revised them, Judge Hogan.
So they're great
perfect now. They're perfect.
Are there I've been looking at the Q&A. I don't see any questions. We've been going over 30 minutes now. Are there any questions from the audience or things?
It's really a fascinating topic, isn't it, Judge
Well,
Hogan?
I've loved that we've kept 10 participants for 32 minutes now. You know, it's so important. And I've been on the side of the litigators who kind of ignore the bylaws until maybe your organization's trying to do something you don't like, and you're like, huh, do our bylaws even allow us to do that? And then putting out the open call, does anyone actually happen to have a copy of the bylaws? So we do have a question here wanting to know thoughts on things that are not helpful when organizations are working on revising bylaws. What's not helpful?
Um,
I think you got
having
to
that
be careful about your members, like who makes up your committee,
right.
right? You want a nice balance of people who aren't going to all agree. But then I think every organization, we have at least that one person that you know if they're too heavily involved is going to derail the whole process and make everyone else want to quit.
Right. Yeah, I have been in the process where there is just one person who argues about everything. That's probably the litigator on the committee.
Who hasn't even read the bylaws?
You just so you work to find consensus, but it would be someone that was just critical of everything and maybe not happy with the organization itself. That would really derail the bylaw process.
So committee membership, other things. I like the strategy where you divided them up because I wonder if people could get assigned to things and then never really work on them, or if it was just kind of left to everybody in general to be reading and making recommendations if nobody would do it, or
Yeah,
only you would
that
do it.
that seemed like kind of a messy way. So we had and the committee, everybody kind of had certain interests. So we divided it up that way based on what their thoughts were on the sections they wanted to work on. But if everyone's just throwing out stuff, then you've got to combine it all together and make it make sense, and that complicates it.
So we've got another question asking, when you divided sections up, was it hard to find one voice?
No, not really. It seemed like at least the section that I did, one person kind of took charge. There were three of us. One person kind of took charge to do the redlining, and then we would get back together and then look it over, talk about what we wanted to do, and do it that way.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I guess we'll wrap up this month's On the Mic. Uh-oh. Here comes another one.
Sorry, I'm wearing a t-shirt because I don't dress up anymore.
Yeah, why
Especially
would
when you're
you? For all we know, that's a silk blouse. We've got another question here. Uh, how did or do you decide what to put in your policies and procedures versus bylaws? That's a great question.
That is a good question. We kind of went with, I mean, it had already been begun. So there was already bylaws and there was already policies and procedures. It's the policies and procedures are more um, processes, exact processes for how, like, members get reimbursed when they travel. Like, okay, you can have a hotel room, you can have your airfare, but you're responsible for your meals and no liquor.
This is Kansas, so liquor will not be included. Not even wine.
No wine for you.
And nobody's ever
Buy,
pushed with non-alcoholic beer.
you buy that yourself. But the policies and procedures, are just more things like that. Um, the bylaws are how the organization operates. The policies and procedures are, and here's when we're gonna evaluate the executive director, and here's how we're gonna do it, and here's how often. And
So why put how the organization responds to current events in policies and procedures as opposed to the bylaws?
I don't know. I guess I can't answer that. It's just the way it had been done, and we continued that. We updated the policies and procedures too, just so you know.
Well, that's an honest answer, so I like that. Any other questions for the Q&A before Laura and I wrap this up? Thank you for your interest in bylaws. I think they can definitely keep your organization on the right track, provide important structure.
We didn't really talk about 501c3s and C4s and C6s, but you have to be very careful with, I mean, I don't
Please
know.
talk about that, because I think that sometimes we as a membership use those terms interchangeably.
Right, and their differences and between what those organizations can do when it comes to fundraising and spending the money, and
Are
it's
donations
really
tax deductible? That's always a big
right.
question members have. Like if you're 501c6, which as I understand it is a professional organization, has a scholarship fund. Are those monies tax deductible?
Right. And so I'm not a tax person. I'm not well versed in that, but I know that you need a lawyer to look over your stuff when you are in an organization or a situation like that, because it is complicated and it is changing all the time. There's a new Kansas law now on C4s, I think. So
What are C4s generally?
that's when it's a political group,
Oh,
so
okay.
you can make political donations, but now you can't accept any donations from foreign nationals or from organizations that have accepted donations from foreign nationals, which is very ambiguous and very complicated, and it's probably going to cause some issues down the line.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be very hard to monitor. Is there, I think, did I see in the news there's a court case on that in Kansas, or has it
I
worked
think
its way
yeah,
through?
I think there may be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like in my corporate world, trying to make sure there's no money laundering involved. It's just going to add some layers of investigation and to the organizations who are fundraising.
And our participant who happens to chair our Kansas Board of Tax Appeals did just point out in the chat that those classifications have implications for tax exemptions for organizations that own property, which is a great point.
Right.
It just highlights the need for expertise. Yeah, in your past life, trying to make sure that you weren't selling planes to what, dictators or drug
Right.
dealers.
Know your customer and chasing down all those layers to the very individuals.
Wow, very interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate your willingness to talk about bylaws, Laura. Very, it's when,
I
just the
have every
hazards of
I have
answering that general request on a listserv. Hey, does anybody know anything about bylaws? Nothing,
Yeah, I
nothing
said,
good
well,
could
yeah,
come of
I've got
that.
some experience, but
Well, I really appreciate your willingness to do this, and I know it'll be helpful to the member organization. So thank you. And guess we'll call this presentation concluded. Thank you.
all right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.